So our next item on the agenda is under new business, and that is an update from the architect and engineering firm selection committee process. This is very exciting.
Yes.
We've been on step 3.5 of the chart that I is a reminder for like months. So
Yeah.
this has been to move us like to step 4 from 3.5.
Good.
Ready?
This is good.
And I love the page, the web page. I'm like, that was good, and I appreciate it.
Yes, certainly.
And the committee has been working very diligently to see which gets step 4.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And what is it, another 17 to follow?
I think more than that.
It's all down now.
Yeah. Members of the architectural committee, selection committee are sitting here. Roy, Neil, where did Katrina go?
She ran out screaming.
Myself and Roberta. In December, a request went out for proposals from various architectural firms, and 6 firms responded. CHA, which I had never heard of before until we found out that they were the Portland design team, which they've been around for a long time, but they go under a new name. Harriman, Valley, Benziger, LMA Architects, Oak Point, and WBRC. We, or 4 firms were selected, well, I'm jumping ahead here. In the interim, on January 21st and 23rd, the following schools were visited, and I must say all committee members made it to every school and to the meeting for selection, so people did their job well. We toured Jefferson School in Jefferson, Miss Lonsky Elementary, Captain Stevens in Belfast, Millstream, or the Norridgewock Elementary School, and the Corinth Elementary, located up in Corinth. We then interviewed on January 30th 4 firms, which were Harriman, WBRC, Oak Point, and CHA. All 4 teams made extensive presentations. They all had provided us with a manual about this size outlining their qualifications, reporting on schools and what they had done. The visits to the individual schools were interesting. I think we learned a lot from them, as well as the architects, and I will summarize some of that very quickly. We were impressed when we learned in Corinth that the state had paid for 98% of the cost of the school. We checked with Scott Brown and said, is this usual? Can this happen? And he was very blasé, but he said, yes, that you can end up with the state paying 100% of the cost. Now, the question arises, why might the state not pay 100% of the cost? And I always used to have the one adage that he pays the piper, calls the tune, and this is doubly true in the case of the state. They have a lot of standards that you go by, and one of the common ones that we ran into, elementary schools have gyms. But since the gyms are only for phys ed, there are no bleachers in the gym. So if you want bleachers, you pay for a slightly larger gym and for bleachers. And we saw a number of schools that had done that. We learned that the state is building now schools in the 400 to 600 student range. Which, if you think about that for a moment, that tells you a lot. They had a number of different heating systems. It was interesting with Roy, who is a heating consultant, heating technician. We saw everything from biomass to architects occurred on January 30th. All of them had presentations. Each one, they obviously do this on a fairly regular basis because we had been given a score sheet by the state, and we also had a series of questions that should be asked. And interestingly, they answered most of the questions in the presentation, and the ones that weren't followed up were kept very good track, and we had asked the follow-up questions. On the 30th, after we had met with the architects and they had left, the committee discussed and we reached a unanimous decision as to the one that we recommend. Now, we are not going to make this in public session. We're going into executive session. We'll share our recommendation, in part because the other ones that don't get the contract have to be notified, and we just preferred that they didn't read about it in the newspaper. We considered their professional qualifications, recent projects that they had completed, projects that the firms had done that were a good indication of their qualifications. We looked at their key personnel, and of course their current workloads. We had one that said he was ready to begin the next morning. So, and since that time we have done, and Roberta has done a large amount of this, checking on their backgrounds with schools that have actually had these architectural firms work for them, and it has been mixed. The firm that we chose, I think, has had nothing but good recommendations. A little anecdote here. On January 24th, the state school construction team visited 3 schools. They never quite told us why they were here, but they looked at the junior high, the annex, and at Benton. And the best clue that I got when I was here, one of the team is a friend of mine. He's the former superintendent in Westbrook prior to another superintendent ending up there. And his question to me off to the side was, what are you going to do with Albion and Clinton? Because remember, it was the elementary school that was rated #1, but it is pretty clear that the state, when they go into a school district, and we're one of the 3 schools selected for new school construction, they want to deal with the total scope of the problem. And so the architectural firm that we are recommending will do probably the following. I'm sure some other things that I'm not aware of. One, they will look at our educational program and the needs that we have and how we will fit these into the new building or into the new construction. They will not be necessarily the ones, although they could be ultimately the firm that designs the building, but the initial architectural scopes it out and comes up with a concept as to what we need. They will also help us with the site selection, and this was a real eye-opener, I think, for those of us on the committee. And I had kind of thought we went out and looked for an empty field that was somewhere near the highway.
There she goes.
And hey, that would be a good place. All the architectural firms, they demonstrated how they use maps, contour maps, soil type maps. They use statistical information that they get from the state in terms of enrollment numbers, the programs that you're going to run there, traffic patterns in the area where your utilities are situated, a very exhaustive process which they said could take up to a year. So you want to tell them about this, or should I? Okay, thank you. It says on the webpage that we will make a recommendation to the full board, and they will interview the team. We have since found out that under the state standards, that it is the selection committee that actually makes the decision. You will get to interview them, but if you reject the recommendation of the selection committee, then we go back to square one and re-advertise the construction process and start all over again. So, are there questions? And I would obviously say if any of the committee wants to, or Roberta wants to interject here and say something, please do.
I think one of the things we heard from our superintendent to our schools is the state's looking at this as like a 50-year fix. So
Mhm.
they're going to come in here and look at, broad scope of what the district needs.
With the elementary schools, but I did, the day that the team from the state was here, one of them said, you need to start thinking about replacing your high school. And we said, we'll do that later.
I want to say thank you to the selection committee, because this was a lot of work, and a lot of work that happened during the day. And I know that you guys had to take time off work, and I appreciate that, because I know that that is a challenge, and a lot of times our board committee meetings and things like that, we try to work around our jobs, and we do it in the evening, or we do it on the weekends, but these were things that you guys had to use vacation time, you had to take time off, or just not including it. I appreciate your willingness to do that and your ability to do that.
They worked hard.
The group did, and thank them, and learned a lot from our visits, and I have from the conversations I've had with superintendents and facilities directors and other support personnel about what new schools are offering students as an experience now, and it's amazing, and they're putting up buildings with spaces dedicated to the programming that our buildings were not designed for, and the services that a school district is called upon to deliver. Can you give some examples? Pre-K being one. Entire wings are going up for pre-K services, special education services. Special education, all those arrays. And we're talking wings are in place, and the idea of common space, but also segregated populations, so we don't have, they're years older, but developmentally, second graders with fifth and sixth graders, that's not a good match. And that takes a lot of real estate in the building. Even this idea of single stall bathrooms. You think about the amount of space that takes to build into a school where it seems like our designs now are classroom after classroom after classroom. The junior high is a great example of two corridors with classrooms down the run, and that's about all we have. So these buildings are designed with the educational experiences and the services that we're required to provide our students. So some examples, and they're bright and airy. Natural light is a big factor, given there's efficiency associated with that. Designing green buildings, looking at fuel sources.
So are they LED certified?
Some of them, and all the firms are LED LEED certified.
Right,
to
yeah.
these, certified
Silver, platinum.
architects, but, with all that in mind, it's been a very eye-opening, process, and I keep coming back to, what a gift it is going to be, to those students when we open the doors finally. Anyway, thank you.
I would follow up on what Roberta was saying, because it was, the time that we were touring was about the same time they were having a fracas in Skowhegan, SAD 54, on the single individual bathrooms. And we asked several different people at different schools, and that this is common, to have single bathrooms where both genders use the bathroom. And it was a strange reaction. There's no problem whatsoever. They said, we don't have vandalism in the single individual bathrooms that we got. For some reason or other, it's not as much fun to stuff paper towels down the toilet and plug it up if you don't have an audience. So people apparently go into the bathroom, do their business, and come out. So.
Just a question about some of the tech. So at least in classrooms at which, people are integrating technologies, which is one of the forefronts in education, right? Where you're having, integrative technologies throughout the classroom. Does the state, did you guys talk to people about that or see examples, and how do they actually deal with, like, the way we have tech infrastructure now in regards to wiring and wireless will be completely different in 50 years. So, like, in what way did they think about addressing some of those things, and what different things did you see? And does the state pay for those jazzy flat screens?
Is 6 years. I believe we were in one that was 6 years older. And
This is Jefferson.
she immediately said, we don't need this computer lab. She immediately addressed, and many of the other ones had kind of switched from computer lab, which had all gone one-to-one in the classroom,
Right.
basically, so it was not needed, to wet or dirty rooms, what they call them, wet rooms. Which at elementary was like a science lab that they could use and do
Yeah.
many different things. The art teachers used them, so it was like but the technologies had come so far in a very short amount of time.
Well, most of it's integrated in the classroom is what I'm
And so it was
saying.
all one-to-one,
Yeah,
and it was a much different.
but you have to have a good infrastructure for that, like, you have to anticipate that and design for
And
it.
certainly they are, but that's one area that the state, to invest in a technology in a design phase that's obsolete by the time you raise the building is,
tough.
so.
So do they not pay for it, is my question?
They pay for it, yes, but what it is and what it becomes and the capacity, depends. That's hard to predict out.
That was one of the last things they put into the school was the technical.
No, it should be, but, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I would just, so I was just talking with a friend, and that Nakoma's just opened their beautiful new school, and that's exciting. But tech was the area, they said, it just, if they had known what they know now, and they spent a lot of money,
That's
they
right.
didn't have, they shouldn't have, and so it is something to keep our eyes on and ask a lot of questions around, because I think it gets outdated as soon as it's, put in, so.
Right.
The Court School was 2016, and what they had was already
It's
outdated.
dated.
She was the one that said, I wouldn't have taken any of this. This is
Yes.
not what it would look like
Yep.
if I had done it now.
But I do think there's hands-on learning experience to be able to craft that. Okay, just want to go back to the wet room, which is like the types of things students are going to be able to do in the classroom in 10 years, elementary school students, about access to be able to do a genome. I'm not kidding you. Like, the software is already there, and it's already at a level you don't need a PhD to do it. So, but it does require a little investment in some of that equipment, right? But that's like the wet lab concept. But those are, that's gonna be the contemporary curriculum, right? So I do think, thinking about that, if we wanna offer the school of the future, it is gonna be around some of the STEM stuff, and I think that the pushback will be about how we can do that on the state's dime. if
You're
we-
gonna bargain some of it.
Right,
That's basically the word we heard over and over and over. You're gonna bargain this for this, or
Okay.
And I think
what's really important to you and what you might be able to live without.
part of it's in establishing a relationship with the people that we're working with the DOE, and I think we're off to a great start. And these buildings that are going up, the Florence School is an example, the Central Community Schools is staying. And one site you want to check out maybe is RC 24 in Sullivan. I've twice spoken with that superintendent, and this is a project that's 99.4% state funded, and these are not austere buildings, you know. So it's just keeping a close eye on the process, and you know that's what you're paying staff to do as well. So it's very exciting, and I would say what's regulated as far as we put out the RFP, the focus is on the qualifications. However, you know, they're all qualified, they're all credentialed, and a big part of this, and I've heard this again and again and again, and I think it was abundantly clear when we interviewed them, it's that match. They have their principal architect, they have their team, and it's that small group of people, frontmen and women, who are working with us, working with our communities, who are really going to bring us along. And that's the principal part of their work right now in this phase. And superintendent after superintendent after superintendent said, you know, that it's that relationship with the firm. And it's very difficult to track projects, just by the way, as a side, because tenures are short, I found, and it's hard to find a superintendent in a district where you have a newly constructed building and they're still there, or it's a few years out. I was able to connect with a few who had very long tenures and saw several projects through, marshaled them through, and had that experience. But it's very exciting for us, and you know, I look forward to move on that.
One thing that we heard, I think you could almost say universally from the architects, what you think you are going to have and what you end up is likely to be very different. It's really kind of a trip. It's an involved one, but I was impressed with the schools that we visited. They were nice-looking schools. They had been designed. Some I would have maybe wanted to do something a little different, but in large, the people seemed very happy with the schools that they had gotten, and I think it's going to be an interesting process here. I was a little surprised when they seemed to think that we were about 5 years off from moving into a new school, so we will see.
Yeah, I have a process question, maybe ahead of I'm not really sure, but I've heard this a few times, of this idea around, I know that it's our certain one school that is on the list, but that there's sort of been an unofficial evaluation or official evaluation looking at other ones of our buildings, and if we could do more. What is going to be the process for that? Like, will that?
That's actually what this is. This is what it is. This is what we engage this firm to do.
They'll try, they'll
It's
scope out.
They
feasibility
work
study.
closely with the
Yeah.
state too, they overlook.
And they come back and make the recommendation to us.
To us, to the end of the DOE.
Right, and then we vote for go, no go.
Right, well, if you look at the multiple steps in place, and you know, we can engage, this firm can go from start to.
No, but I mean, like, let's just air it out, if there's gonna be consolidation, the board votes for that.
Certainly.
That's what I'm saying, like, we
Communities-
vote for go, no go, so.
Yeah, and the communities will weigh in that is part of the process. But
That was interesting in that I think all the schools that we visited commented that that had been a challenge in their school construction because there was an element of consolidation and not everybody wanted to consolidate.
And some of them, did it, they started the school expecting 600 or so students, and one school did not end up
They broke from the.
there, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that really
goes to what one of the primary focuses is of the architect and selection process, is that their primary tasks in the beginning are all of those feasibility studies to come up with what is the best structure for the district moving forward in this 50-year plan.
And
What
that was
is,
one of the themes when we interviewed them, it's like, listen, this is kind of the history and where we are, and, you know, and the one thing that we really like is like, okay, we need to start, maybe we need to do this step first, of listening.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask about, because it's not just about traffic studies, it's about climate and culture.
Mhm.
And so did they address that, they also address that to understand? Okay, because that is the big thing, that they have someone who's trained
And they talked about bringing in a separate.
Entity to do it.
entity to do that.
because that's really about like understanding, you know, you could change the face of a community forever, right? And I don't think that, you know, that's something to be done lightly, and that when you do that, that does require an in-depth climate and culture survey, right? In which people are understanding the sociological and the economic impact of doing it. It's hand in hand, right? And so, and that the board feels that, but if they provide that service,
I felt like they all had extreme experience in that.
yeah,
Greater
that's
than we've
important.
ever dealt with, that they all,
Good.
And that's what they do.
Yeah.
You could have a fleet of architects and engineers in the backside of a firm, but the people that we spoke with are the people who are interacting with the public, and that is their job. They're credentialed to this other work, that's their primary job. And it's not unique to MSAD 49. And they understand those pieces of the process, and that's where their skill set is.
and many of them have been down multiple different scenarios. And, you know, one of them was going to build an elementary school and ended up with a K through 12, like
Right.
all together. And the next one had, you know, built the elementary school and one of them didn't come. And so they've all seen a wide variety of different
Outcomes.
Yeah.
the next item on our agenda is to go into executive session to discuss the particulars of this week's approving of contract. Okay, so I would entertain a motion to go into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA, section 405D, discuss the labor contract. Second. Moved by Neil, seconded by Kara. Go into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA, section 405D, to discuss the labor contract pertaining to the architect selection committee. All in favor? 13, opposed, abstained, 13-0-0. We'll go in at 8:23. All right, I would entertain a motion for the superintendent to engage in contract negotiations with the Department of Education and the selected architecture and engineering firm.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Stu and seconded by Neil to allow the superintendent to engage in contract negotiations with the Department of Education and the selected architecture and engineering firm. All in favor? 13. Opposed? Abstained. 13-0-0. Excellent. We'll get to move our arrow on our chart. So I have anyone.
Sounds like we should have cake.
How long's your next session gonna be? I'll let Hanford.
Go down and get one an hour on it, Ben.
We're actually not going to have that next executive session. The next item we have on our agenda is a vote to approve the first reading of revised policy AC, non-discrimination, equal opportunity, affirmative action as presented by the policy committee.
Second.
Moved by Katrina and seconded by Judy. Any discussion? Someone want to just offer a summary of what the update is, the change there?
Just the gender.
Yes, that is the only update, the only revision in every one of them that we've listed here this evening.
I'm sorry, did you hear what?
Gender.
Okay, I did, I just didn't hear you.
So it's just the updating the language around
Yes,
gender.
in addition,
Okay.
Gender identity.
yes.
All right. All in favor of the first reading of revised policy AC, non-discrimination, equal opportunity, affirmative action as presented by the policy committee? 13. Opposed, abstained, 13-0-0. Next is a vote to approve the first reading of revised policy ACAA, harassment and sexual harassment as presented by the policy committee.
So moved. Second.
By Danielle and seconded by Judy. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? 13, opposed, abstained, 13-0-0. Would entertain a motion to approve the first reading of revised policy ACAAR, student discrimination and harassment complaint procedure as presented by the policy committee.
So moved.
Moved by Katie and seconded by Katrina. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of the first reading of policy ACAAR?
Dash R.
Dash R.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
I tried. Abstained and opposed. 13-0-0. I would entertain a motion to approve the first reading of revised policy ACAB, harassment and sexual harassment of school employees as presented by the policy committee.
So moved.
Moved by Katie and seconded by Ray. To approve the first reading of revised policy ACAB. All in favor? 13. Opposed, abstained, 13-0-0. And finally, a vote to approve the first reading of revised policy ACAB-R, employee discrimination and harassment complaint procedure as presented by the policy committee.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Danielle and seconded by Judy. Judy, I knew it was over there, but I couldn't quite tell. Katrina. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of a vote to approve the first reading of revised policy ACAB-R? 13. Opposed, abstained, 13-0-0.
I hate making the actions of these, some ones.
We have no resignations? Appointments. I would entertain a motion to approve Samantha Buzzell as food service worker as her 90-day probation period is complete.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Kara, seconded by Neil. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? 13-0-0. Committee reports. We all met today. Well, policy.
I was lost.
Katrina got lost.
Oh. There's a policy for that. MAPS. Dash R. Yeah, exactly. Dash R. Dash ANNES.
Well, finance met and education met. Finance met and there has been a first pass of the budget, which includes the requests. We talked a little bit last meeting, I think, about the impact of already negotiated collective bargaining agreements as well as what we've included as a projection for health insurance. And those two things were about $700,000 of an increase over this year's budget. All of the requests that have come into the budget group at this point come up to about a $1.1 to $1.2 million increase over the current year budget. About a 4.4% increase over the current year. And what that works out to is, this is just the first pass, so no one has made any cuts to anything or any revisions, this is just what has been submitted. That works out to an impact on the mill rate of less than 1 per community of an increase. Part of that reason is the state subsidy funding that came out right at the end of January, the night we met with Steve Bailey. Our state subsidy amount would be going up next year, based on the governor's supplemental budget, by about $1 million. So that makes a huge impact, and that really offsets the fact that we won't have as much carry forward to use toward our budget next year. We were advised by our auditors that we needed to work that balance down over years, and we did. Maybe more dramatically in the last year than we would have done in a more planful way, but regardless, we're now at about the 3% carry forward that DOE has recommended. So if we budgeted to use about $500,000 worth of carry forward, still, we would be able to put forward this budget, which includes, at this point, everything everybody has requested, and the impact is less than $1 million per community. That's impressive.
Yeah, that's good.
So there have been more budget and finance committee meetings scheduled. We are planning to meet again on March 3rd. It's going to allow Tara some time to put information together, or March 2nd. March 2nd. We'll be hearing from the special education director, because a significant part of our budget and a part of that increase is special education costs. So we're planning to hear from Amy on the 2nd, as well as from Scott regarding any facility transportation parts that are in the budget, so that we can make sure we understand what those are. And we're hoping to hear from the principals at our meeting, our normal budget, our normal board meeting on probably the 19th. So that we can make sure that happens in a very public way. Our finance committee meetings are always public and people are welcome to attend, but this way, whatever the principals present would be reported in public. We want everyone to see that, because I do think it's important for the community to know that a lot of work does go into putting together a budget. It is a thoughtful process by the administrators, by the business office staff, and we just want to make sure everyone has a chance to hear about it and ask any questions as we go along, instead of waiting till the night of the budget meeting in the gym, because that is a really hard time for making changes. It's a lot easier to make those things happen before that night. So we are planning to meet again March 2nd, which is a Monday at 6 o'clock, down in this room, or in, I believe it's in the Williamson conference room right now. So March 2nd there, we'll be meeting again at our regularly scheduled finance committee meeting on the 19th, right before our normal board meeting at 6 o'clock. And then we'll turn it over to education.
Education Programs Committee met tonight. We purposely delayed the transportation survey because we didn't want to inundate the public with 2 different surveys going on at the same time, so that should be released soon.
Yeah, get on it. Oh, right. The key for the education committee is do something and be like, Cara, can you do that? Okay.
Yeah, we reviewed the calendar, but didn't have the mid-May tech calendar tonight, so we'll go over that again.
And Mr. Kent
Oh, geez.
had some ideas about the calendar, and he's going to put together a bulleted list, bullet points,
Check, check.
to forward these suggestions to us, so Roberta can take a look at them and decide whether or not. But some of it was really looking at, could we move could we have fewer days? And still be within our constraints, and some ways that other districts are handling that. Beth brought forward this new innovative idea that may come to the state.
Got shot down, snow legs.
So it was a lively discussion, but there were some good ideas that I think are worth taking into consideration around the calendar, which everyone, of course, wants to be here for 250 days.
Any word on when this started?
It's gonna, the main tech first draft.
Has anyone seen it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like the 22nd.
Oh, my lord.
Really?
It goes back to the 15, 16 school year.
Always popular.
Yeah,
Good news, good, great, Neil, thanks, Neil.
At the end of June.
Christmas, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so,
So then you're gonna send that to me?
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
thank you.
And Tara was named the new chairman of the education committee.
Rock, paper, scissors, I lost, I tried to voice it both on Judy and on Beth, but they were like,
We're gonna play new cards.
I know, and I was like, fine.
We're good. All right, so that is it from.
Oh, wait, there's one thing we did forget. We were gonna do an examination about, multi-age classroom. There was a very robust discussion about some of the challenges to doing that. So we're gonna be asking people to list this on a Google Doc. There was, lots of discussion sort of about the challenge of the Envision program, which is so time comprehensive. How could you possibly put that into 2 classrooms? There were a lot of understanding about structures in the curriculum. So that will be further vetted so that we can bring it back. And then also in regards to the busing thing, we will have that, but we did talk about, that basically the cost savings is not that great for us because the challenges are really about the number of people, and that has been recommended that we keep that. So it's just, there needs to be a little bit more of a discussion about the pros and cons of that, but the cost savings for us would not be as significant.
So will you have that information to ask back?
Yeah, hopefully by the next meeting.
Okay, great, perfect.
And I want to recognize Danielle for her amazing work and being so good and really doing a good job with the hot potato there.
Thank you. Our next meeting will be March 9th at 6 PM at the Lawrence Junior High School Library. All are welcome.
Is it the Ides of March? When is the Ides of March? 50. A little later. I was waiting for that.
The superintendent's report?
The foremost thing on our minds, and what is happening in our schools is trying to address yesterday morning's events and the loss of 3 of our students, and 2 others involved in a very horrific accident. I commend our staff, and we have some members here, a member here, who have pulled together, and I, from what I've observed, have done amazing work in getting students, what they need. And I must have had 6 or 8 interviews today with media, but I can't say enough about what I saw in the buildings today. And even the team, the crisis response team that met yesterday in my office, who just pulled together, and administrators and counselors, and carved out, how we were going to welcome kids into the school. Both buildings met with their staff, with the counselors, somewhat leading it and advising teachers how, maybe suggesting how they might approach different behaviors that they might see with students or just process with them. Fortunately, I think in both buildings, they begin the day in small settings, which is maybe more helpful to students in that way. And we had a couple of designated areas. In the high school was the library. In the junior high, it was the end of the guidance wing where students could go. And I'm repeating repeating myself, but, you know, it's one thing that's unique and intangible about this school district, and it's the people here, or staff that it's, you know, been at Lawrence High for many, many years and talked about similar situations and advising, you know, what worked and what was helpful. And though that was years ago, it's the same human emotion, it's the same pain of loss, and it's very hard for a staff to see young people suffering, you know, in pain, and you know, I can't thank our people enough for what they do for kids every day. And I think area school districts, I must have heard from at least 20 superintendents offering any support that they could, and locally in the way of counselors. We had counselors from Waterville and Winslow, but others were on standby, and we may need to use them tomorrow as students work through, you know, the initial shock of it. And maybe smaller groups, but needing more intensive supports. I heard from multiple mental health agencies offering clinical support. You know, let us know what you need and we'll be here. So communities have been very supportive. And just, you know, one day at a time, but I do think it's important that parents recognize the school as a resource to connect them with resources as that bridge, and just being alert to what you may see or notice in your child, and it might be students who weren't necessarily in a peer group, but each of us has our own experiences that we carry around in our heads, and they're affected in different ways. So just for adults to be paying attention to them, and maybe Katie could offer some more thought on that as you work as a counselor. I don't need to put.
I have nothing prepared, but, yeah, it comes out in weird ways. Maybe you don't need to be a counselor for me to say that, but you know, that the kids are chatty, quiet. I also really just want to echo that even though there are students who are not friends, or that's not true, who are not in the peer groups, it can trigger stuff that has nothing to do with this. And then, you know, like Katrina and I were talking, is sometimes just walking in your classroom and seeing that something's different and you know what happened can set off, it can set stuff off for weeks, you know, months. So, and every day's different. I think that's the hardest to gauge, because you never know when it may not hit today, it may hit tomorrow, it may hit next week, and I think that part is the hardest.
So when we become aware of services for the students, we'll, you know, depending on the timing, we'll make some decisions about how students will be able to access that and staff. But I'm not aware of anything now. I know that there's some fundraising going on. One of the students is still hospitalized in Portland. And that family certainly could use help as well. But again, the community has, I think, rallied, and we'll see more of it. But I expect it to take some time. And the timing of school vacation, it just is. But for some, maybe some distance in processing privately, but for some others, closing school might be a difficult thing. So, you know, getting those resources to kids. I think our counselors are, at least today, because some of them spent some time one-on-one with students. The team had generated, you know, lists of students that they thought most would be immediately affected. and checking in. And again, it's paying attention and knowing the kids that the way they do, and knowing what each of them might need. So anyway, I'm very proud of our staff for what they have done and will continue to do. The other just comments I wanted to make, we would like to move a comp day and a workshop day for our 7-12 staff on the calendar in March. We'd like to flip March 6th and March 27th because on March 27th, the Lawrence Complex is hosting a music festival. And we are going to host many students from multiple high schools. And they take the buildings and a lot of the spaces. And the high school staff felt, and I know that the leadership sent out a survey to the high school staff. Sorry, Ben, I keep looking at you, you're the person.
You're
But,
right.
right. If there was a preference, the option of vacating this and holding 7-12 workshop in service at Benton Elementary like we started the year was not something that it's not easiest, and that way you don't have your materials around you. So they were wanting to flip their comp day with the in-service day. So for 7-12, the in-service will be March 6th. Both days are not student days. It's not really for families. And they'll take their comp day on the 27th. I don't see any concerns with that. The association is in agreement. Is anyone opposed to that? No. Okay, and the other piece I just wanted to mention, we talked about in the finance committee, is moving toward, freeze sounds cold, but the budget, and making sure that we've encumbered all that we can so we can move forward and Tara can do her work and look at, potentially what we'll have to carry forward. And this is common, that we do this about this time of year. Sometimes it happens a little bit earlier, and it's not that people, staff won't get things that they requested and that they need. And we've encumbered the bulk of the cost, and that's the personnel. So I wanted you to be aware that that's what we're gonna do, we'll get a better picture of where we stand financially. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to go into one more executive session. So I would enter, and then that will be it. For the interested parties in the audience. I would entertain a motion to go into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA section 4056D to discuss contract negotiations.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Danielle, seconded by Judy. All in favor?